Hi, good evening, everyone. Again, thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. My name is Francisco, and I'm a staff assistant with the Office of Supervisor Mitchell. Thank you. Some quick housekeeping items. The restrooms are to your back right corner. There's 2 restrooms, one on each side. There's water in the back. Welcome again. Thank you. So like I mentioned, my name is Francisco. I'm a staff assistant with the Office of Supervisor Mitchell. We would like to welcome you to our March Racial Justice Learning Exchange titled Pride in Place, Identity, Solidarity, and Community, Power in a Changing South Central LA. We are at the Connect in the heart of South LA. And I would like to acknowledge the CEO and founder of the Connect. Tiffany, are you here? She's in the back, so please, thank you again for opening your doors to this event. If you haven't met her, please connect with her. She has a great event space, a co-working space. She wants to open this to the community. It's the community, so please connect with her. So I'm from Watts. So this event, I'm from Watts. This event is very meaningful to me. Grew up, born and raised, and I'm back there now living. So thank you for coming here, and we're sharing this experience with me. Before we start, I want to provide a quick context on the overall of the Racial Justice Learning Exchange Initiative. Today's event is the March event in a series of monthly Racial Justice Learning Exchange events that Supervisor Mitchell and her team organized for the 2nd District and broader county. Founded in February 2022, the 2nd District Racial Justice Learning Exchange is an initiative of the Office of Supervisor Holly J. Mitchell that brings district residents, county, civic, and community leaders together to learn from and celebrate our diversity, confront biases, and inspire meaningful steps to eliminate structural racism. Before we kick off, I'm going to read our county's land acknowledgement, which was adopted unanimously by the board in November 2022, after months of collaboration with leaders from local tribes. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Quiche, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. We are dedicated to growing and sustaining relationships with Native people and local tribe governments, including, in no particular order, the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, Gabrielino Tongva Indians of California Tribal Council, Gabrielino Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians, Quiche Nation, San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, San Fernando Band of Mission Indians. To learn more about the first people of Los Angeles County, please visit the Los Angeles City County Native American Indian Commission website at lanaic.lacounty.gov. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. My name is Sarah Harris. I'm the Deputy for Economic and Community Development for Supervisor Mitchell, and I'm a co-organizer of the event with Francisco, Robert, and Carolyn, our other teammate. So just wanted to quickly I think a lot of you had a chance to look through the art in the back of the room. Thank you to the LA County Department of Arts and Culture for helping us. LA County has an incredible historical art collection, and we were able to use that for the art in the back, as well as LA Commons, who elevated art from local artists in South Central LA. So really excited that we have that in the back of the room, and hoping if you haven't had a chance to see it, you can walk through at the end of the event, read the cards underneath to learn more. As Francisco said, this event happens every month, and it covers topics, a wide range of topics across the 2nd District, but today's event is really focused on South Central LA, in the heart of South Central LA, and we really want to, in the heart of the 2nd District. And we really want to focus on both the history of South Central LA as well as its current day conditions and its future and kind of the momentum and hope that we're seeing there. We want to talk about how anti-Black racism has really shaped the conditions there, but also talk about how we have so much to learn from how the residents have innovated and built wealth and power and solidarity and resistance to and in spite of those conditions. So really excited to dig into today's conversation. We're going to start off with some audience discussion. We want you all to pair up. Robert will share more about that, but want you all to have a chance to talk briefly. We have an amazing audience here today. Then we're going to move into a quick presentation from Dr. Manuel Pastor about South Central LA to really ground us in that history. And then we're going to move on to the panel, which is really the main event for today. And very excited about the panelists we have today, and we'll share more later on. So just before we kick off, I want to read our community agreements. We read these for all of our RJLE events. And they should be on the slide. So, be kind and courteous to each other. Patience and understanding are important to ensure each person is heard. Respect differences. Everyone is at a different level of understanding, and that is okay. We have to respect each other and where we are in life. Try to monitor your tone and word choice as much as possible. Be gracious. There is no wrong question or dumb questions. Confidentiality. To embark on this work, we have to trust each other, and a big part of trust is ensuring you are keeping the space safe. Be accountable and receptive. If you have offended or you feel you may have offended someone, take a moment and acknowledge and apologize during these conversations. Wanted to quickly pause and see if there's any questions about this list or any additions to the list. Great. Now that we're all in agreement on these norms, we're really excited to kick off, and I will pass to my teammate, Robert.
Good evening, everyone. I could do better. Come on. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. My name is Robert Jackson, and I am a Deputy for Constituent Engagement, and I am a co-organizer in this event along with my lovely colleagues Sarah, Francisco, and Caroline in the back. And I am born and raised in South Central. You all gonna clap it up for that? And this event is near and dear to my heart, and I'm so glad to have you all here. First things first, for a show of hands, please raise your hand if you're from South LA. Okay, it's a good amount. Clap it up for yourself. Okay. Raise your hand if you're from South Central. And give it up, please. Let's go. Other than Francisco, do we have any more folks here from Watts? Okay. Watts strong. We have a diverse group here. We have people from South LA, South Central, Watts, and all over the 2nd District and far and near. So we appreciate you all for being here. And now we want to have a small discussion between you and the person next to you. And I want you to follow these rules, these questions. They're going to be here on the screen, and I'll read them to you. Please introduce yourself and answer the following 2 questions, which are also projected on this TV screen. Think about the neighborhoods where you grew up and where you live today. How would you describe the place-based racial identity of the neighborhood, and how has it changed over time? The next question reads, what narratives and ideas do you think about when you hear South Central LA and South LA? You have 10 minutes. Okay. We are now going to bring it back to the front. Everybody, final 5 seconds of your conversation. This is good. I love the energy here. Everyone, need your attention here. Look at me. We're going to bring it back now. So I am now going to choose 3 different groups, and I want y'all to discuss what was the consensus. Was it South Central or was it South LA? And this is regarding the first question. Okay? I'm sorry. You want the questions? They'll bring them up right now. Here are the questions, and it was, think about the neighborhood where you grew up or where you live today. How would you describe the place-based racial, it's the second question. What narratives and ideas do you think about when you hear South Central LA and also South LA? I want to hear the consensus, and I'm going to call on, who do I call on? The first group, like we're in school. You know, when you sit in front of the classroom, you always get called on. We all know this, but no worries. I'm going to call someone in the back too, because they did that on purpose, so they wouldn't be called on. So, you know, we have equity. We're about equity in Holly Mitchell's office. Clap it up for equity.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Erin. I grew up in South LA as well. And so how would I describe the place-based racial identity?
It's the second question. What narratives and ideas do you think about when you hear South Central LA versus South LA?
That's a really deep.
Just top of your head, real quick.
I think of narratives and ideas. I think of, community empowerment.
Okay.
And sorry, you guys cut me off the spot. And also we were talking about gentrification as well, and how recently a lot of the homes in South LA have gone. Yeah, but we were just talking about gentrification and how a lot of the homes in South LA have gone up. And sadly, me and my family were priced out. But now we live in Compton, and we really do love the community. But yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Frederica McGee, Supervisor Mitchell's Chief of Staff. And what we were trying to get to about those 2 questions are the dynamics that are coming about why we're here. We always hear about the dynamics where there's the black versus brown. We've had when it was called South Central LA, it was synonymous with an African American community. That's what we were trying to get to when we were trying to have you have that conversation. And now the new terminology tends to be South LA. And is that because that we have more brown brothers and sisters in our community and that we're more diverse than we were before? Or what do you think about when you think about the changes in that terminology? So that's what we were trying to get to begin the conversation that Manuel Pastor and our panel will begin with. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for that discussion, and I will now introduce our first speaker, Dr. Manuel Pastor, who will share a brief presentation of the history and evolution of South Central LA. Dr. Manuel Pastor is a distinguished professor of sociology and American studies ethnicity at Southern University of California, where he currently directs the Equity Research Institute. In 2021, he published 2 new books, South Central Dreams, Finding Homes and Building Community in South LA, co-authored by Perret Sotelo, and Solidarity Economic, Why Mutuality and Movements Matter, co-authored with Chris Benner. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Manuel Pastor.
Thanks. Good to be with you. And like any academic, I'm going to start with a rap video. So let me cue this up. This is a video that was done by some of the young researchers working on the project that led to the book, South Central Dreams. The rapper in the video, hopefully it comes on okay, is actually now getting his PhD at Indiana University. This, I think, is the only academic book that came with its own rap video. And the great thing about it is that. The kind of sad thing about it is he says in about 1 minute and 45 seconds what it took us 300 pages to say. So please enjoy.
Strolling down 103rd, I walk past Jordan High, where seeds are planted in the soil, where black babies are born to fly. What lies they told me of this land, I could still hear 65. I feel the beat of 92 every time that I drive by. My family came from other lands, but my parents rebelled anyway. Moved to the US of A, to this city they called LA. Gentrification and oppression, hoods changing at rapid rates. But South Central, this land is sacred. Brown faces, black space. I'm talking 42nd and Central down to the NGs. Grape in 103 to Florence and Normandy. They say it ain't safe after dark. We say it's home, don't get lost. Where my barrio is also my block. We just trying to avoid the cops. Latino children speaking jazz, singing the blues, spitting these raps, overcoming the traps, so maybe we could give back. Who's to tell this ghetto child how she or he identifies? These intersections, though, are mine. This neighborhood taught me to thrive.
I should probably get off right now, but no professor will do that. This neighborhood taught me to thrive. That's really the message that was coming out from this young man, too, about strength and community organizing. And I want to talk a little bit about what was in the book that comes from years of working with folks in South LA, a little bit about the history. Before I always get started, I always like to let people know that if my voice breaks or gets a bit strained, it's not that I'm an emotional being with a wonderful crowd in South LA. Although I am emotional being with a great crowd in South LA. It's that I have a speech condition called spasmodic dysphonia. Spasms around the voice box can cause my voice to break, or to compensate, it can cause me to speak with lots of breaks between words. I always like to also let people know, this is true, that it gets treated once a month with Botox. Because that's how we treat everything in Los Angeles. So, completely works for us, for sure. So, it's important to understand, of course, South Central as being a key anchor point for black culture in Los Angeles, of course, around Central Avenue. And there was a big increase in the black population in South Central and spreading into the rest of South Los Angeles, particularly to Leimert Park, Baldwin Hills, etc., after the Watts Rebellion, White Flight, and the opening of people moving into more parts of South LA as people challenged racially restrictive covenants and racist real estate practices. So that by the year 1970, South LA, a really big set of geography, was about 80% African American, and fully half of all black Angelenos, meaning fully half of all black people living in LA County, lived in South LA. So it really was the heart of South Los Angeles. Now, it changed quite a bit in the 80s and 90s. Next slide. We can get in, next slide. What you can see here is for the 80s, the bar on the left, the 90s, and then the odds going to 2016, that there was both a black exodus and a Latino entrance. The black exodus was driven by deindustrialization. It is important to realize that when LA deindustrialized, the first folks to lose their jobs were black workers. That set up the economic crisis that fed into the crack cocaine epidemic, and also gang warfare as being gangs becoming, the drug trade becoming an economic activity, and gangs defending a park, not just because people played in it, but because it was a location for commerce. And in particular, so the 80s exodus was driven a lot by deindustrialization. The 90s was driven classically by exodus of black folks, was driven classically by something that is captured by the song Good Kid, Mad City, Kendrick Lamar, where he keeps talking about being caught between the red and the blue. If you were raising a young black man in South LA in the early 90s, your kid was caught between the red and blue, the Crips and the Bloods, or, if you know that song, by the second verse, he's going back from Bible study and he's pulled over and harassed by the police, the other form of red and blue. So there's a big exodus of black folks in the 90s because of the combination of gang activity and over-policing and over-incarceration and the threat that posed to kids. The Latino influx was driven, there were always Latinos in South LA. I have to say that because there's always one Latino who's like, I lived here forever, right? I got you, brother, you did, right? But there's a huge increase in Latinos in South LA in the 80s and 90s, driven by the Mexican debt crisis and the economic collapse in Mexico, the civil wars in Central America, and what that meant was there was a huge influx of immigrant Latinos to Los Angeles, and there's only so many Latinos you can fit into Pico Union. After a while, it fills up, right? And people start spilling down, particularly Vermont Avenue. If you look at the data on Central Americans, it starts spilling down through Central Avenue, through Vermont Avenue, and by the early aughts, the high school with the largest number of Central American students was Manual Arts. Not just in LA, but in the United States, right? So there's this big change. What does that look like in terms of maps? Let's go to a map, because who doesn't love maps? This is South LA in 1970. The greener the area, the higher the percent of black population. You can see the Central Avenue corridor. You can see most of South LA is at least 50% African American at this point. You can also see that there's a little bit of spillover of folks who are not black from the southeast cities like Maywood, etc., and a little bit from downtown LA. As we move to, I think it's 2010, the next slide, or maybe 2016, you could see the black population is much more concentrated on the Glenmurray Park, Hyde Park, Baldwin Hills areas, and the traditional heart of South Central Avenue is no longer majority black. Who moved in? Next slide. This is Latinos in South LA. Just a few spilling over from downtown LA and from Huntington Park, and again the southeast cities. By the time we moved to the 2010, huge Latino influx, particularly there. You'll notice the one white spot that remains, that's USC. We need to do something about that. But anyway, this is big demographic change. And there's a number of interesting things about this demographic change. One of the things is that when it initially started to occur, there certainly were conflicts and tensions in high schools, in housing projects, in places of employment, etc. And what most journalists and what most academics did was visit at the time of tension and report on it and argue that black-brown tension was inevitable, continuing, would never change. What most academics and journalists don't do is return and ask what's happened since. What's been the theme of black-brown organizing, black-brown solidarity, and transformation. You can see here, this is the youth population. The Latino youth population went up. The black youth population went down for the reasons I was mentioning, of families moving out with their kids. Next slide. And you can see this in the high schools. You can't see the slide so well, but for example, Locke in 1981 was 98% black. By the time you get to 2016, it was 71% Latino. So massive transformation in our schools and difficult challenges for black parents in particular. Because what happens when these schools have been the places where you went, where you were sending your kids, where you think it's a fundamental place for you to have influence, and yet the PTA meeting now is in Spanish because that's the dominant language of the parents. This is a real phenomena. Unless we actually talk about it, we can't find bridges to one another. We just find hostility and distance. So lifting up difference, lifting up problems is our way to finding not just commonality, but uncommon common ground. The common ground where we challenged ourselves about our differences. You can see here something which for those of you who don't like charts, I don't understand you. But let me tell you what this chart says. The important thing to realize is that black home ownership was pretty stable until 2008, 2009, and the big financial crisis, gone down a little bit since. Latino home ownership has been on the rise. Latinos are not a transitory phenomena in South LA. Yes, there was a big influx, but people have settled in, people have put their roots in, they have found home, they've built community. What this chart tells you, though, is something that's really different in South LA. If you look at South LA for homeowners, about half of black homeowners have been here for more than 30 years. It's the older woman who owns a home, and she's still trying to figure out a way to create financing so her kids can buy it. Some of the, if you look at the Latino home ownership, nearly half have owned their home for less than 10 years. And I think that's an important thing to lift up, because when you've owned your home for less than 10 years, you probably have a lot of cousins living with you to be able to pay the rent or to pay the mortgage, which the older black homeowners did 30 years ago too, right? So how do we talk about each other's experiences in real and authentic ways? Next slide. So what does it mean to lead in South LA? What I think it means, and I'm borrowing a term from my good friend Angela Glover Blackwell, the disinvestment in LA is a function of anti-black racism and the way in which that's been embedded into our societies. So it is the anti-black racism that sets the protocols of oppression that affects everyone else. If you are Latino in South LA, you don't get better schools because you're Latino. You don't get better commercial corridors because you're Latino. The protocols of oppression have been set by anti-black racism. And unless that becomes a fundamental teaching point within the Latino community, the need to challenge anti-black racism and colorism, we're going to get exactly the kind of embarrassing conversations that took place were revealed last fall and took place longer. Next slide. So what we need to be, they're moving the slides pretty quickly because they're telling me I need to get off. Latinos can speak forever, you know. So one of the things we need to do is to challenge anti-black racism. One of the things we need to do is to start thinking about building assets. Because while other people in the rest of Los Angeles think that South LA is somehow going to be impervious to gentrification, those of you who are looking at the home buying patterns and understanding the changes that are taking place, which Erin Aubry has written eloquently about, understand that we need to figure out a way for people to defend their assets. Because just as black and Latino folks have found their way to each other, have embraced the pride of place in South LA have understood the resilience of what it means to grow up in South LA. Just as that big, beautiful community is being built, it's at risk of being stolen through these processes of displacement. So in order to really make progress, we need to create on-ramps to civic participation. We need to understand the importance of strengthening Black voice and the preservation of Black space. We need to strengthen Black Latino alliances and understand the need for Latinos to create space and voice as well. And we need to invest in reframing the public narrative around South LA. The broader public narrative around South LA is around deficits and problems. But what Watts, I mean, I'm surprised, like there were only like 4 or 5 people from Watts, but they shouted like there were 100, right? So, and they do because Watts is, we are taught to survive. This is a place of resilience, of strength, of community building, of assets, and that narrative needs to be the narrative that's told. That narrative of community, that narrative of strength is a narrative that allows us to challenge the broader systems of oppression that have created the disinvestment and attract the kind of investments that people want. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pastor. Another round of applause. That was probably the fastest, most eloquent presentation. And if you want to read more South Central Dreams, amazing book, you can get that. So without further ado, I want to introduce our esteemed leader, Supervisor Holly Mitchell. We're going to bring her up, and we are going to bring up our panelists for the main event. Come on up.
Hello, South Lost. Hello. So when Frederica came up and made the comment about the name change, the 3 of us kind of looked at each other and we were like, no, I think the name just changed. It's interesting how we all have different perspectives about what led to the name change. And those of you who've seen my nameplate and hear me say South Lost, I was in a store and saw this young Latinx sister who had a nameplate that said East Lost. And I said, that's cool. I'm going to get one that says South Lost. So once again, I just made it up. It's another name change. So you will hear me say throughout today's conversation, South Lost, because I like that. I think it's hip. It is great to see you all here, and I appreciate you coming from the bottom of my heart. When I walked in, Dr. Pastor said, how you doing? I said, I'm great. He said, well, why? I said, because my badass team are so committed to this work that every month, not just for Cesar Chavez Day on Monday or Dr. King Day or Black History Month, every month for over a year now, they have curated brilliant spaces and conversations to create an opportunity for us to have some of the most difficult conversations, and that's about race. That's why I'm doing great, Dr. Pastor. That's why. So, and I see a lot of repeat attendees. I appreciate you all for going on this journey with us. I see some really important county leaders. Please know how much I appreciate you being here, because a part of our original vision was to create an opportunity for the people I have the privilege of appointing to serve on boards and commissions to kind of get to know me, understand what drives Team Mitchell. Then we thought county department heads, it'd be important for them to understand and be a part of this conversation too. So it has grown and grown and grown and grown. And we have evolved over the past year, and thank you. Tiffany with the Connect, wave your hand. Where's Tiffany? Come up, Tiffany. Is this an amazing space? Yes. Just turn around so you can wave. I want you all to see Tiffany. Tiffany, give us 3 sentences on the Connect. What do you want people to know about this space?
The Connect is an urban co-working space that is designed for the community to have roots. I'm watching gentrification happen, and I just want us to have a place that we can take ownership of and that can be a home, and that can provide advocacy, and that can provide space for people to work and grow and thrive. So clearly this is where we're supposed to be, right here to have this conversation, isn't it? I love it when a plan comes together. When I looked at the first question, I thought about my own life and why South loss is in me and of me. Erin's father and my mother were in the East Side Boys and Girls together. They were Jefferson Democrats. I am a product of Leimert Park. I'm a product of Leimert Park because when my mother graduated from USC with her social work degree in her hand and she thought she was going to save the world and politely went over to the jungle and she couldn't get an apartment. They wouldn't rent to her. Leimert Park would, but she couldn't get an apartment in the jungle, and a couple of her white female classmates went over and they could rent an apartment in the jungle. Wow. Interesting how that happens sometime. So I got off the freeway here in Gage Avenue. I called my god sister because her grandmother, Miss Harris, owned a duplex on Gage, and we would go there and she would bake coconut cakes. This is Ruth's mother, Olivia, and Miss DuPont Walker, Ruth Russian's mother, Miss Harris. And because I was the tallest in the group, they would send me in the back to pick the figs out of the fig tree. And then when she realized when she sent me to pick the strawberries, I would put one in the bowl and eat two. So I got removed from that duty. So South lost grandmother Bruce, whose husband owned a car dealership on Central Avenue. A great uncle who owned a barber shop along Central Avenue. Cousins through marriage were the founders and the developers of the Dunbar Hotel. So when I say I'm a third generation native Angelino, my roots go deep and broad, and I work hard to honor them every day. So there's really so much we can learn from our South lost communities and heritage. And South LA shows the impact that structural racism has on limiting a community's access to resources and opportunities. But it also serves as a model, and we have much to learn from you all as residents about community pride, investment, innovation, and social justice. So I am really thrilled to introduce to some of you the people who are on the panel today. Again, Erin Aubry Kaplan, journalist, essayist, columnist, and author who writes about race, politics, culture, and the intersection of all three. She's a contributing opinion writer to the Times, LA Times, and New York Times, and contributing writer to Politico and Huffington Post. She is a South Central native and currently resides in Inglewood. Thank you for being here. And you can feel free to just leave the boots here when we're done. Just leave them right here. And
we'll do an exchange.
My new friend, Jorge Nuno, small business owner and social entrepreneur. He is a South Central native, committed to building his success from local talent. Owner of The Big House, Nuño has created a small business incubator for local nonprofit organizations and Black and brown businesses. Please welcome the entire panel. So, in your introductions, I talked about that the two of you at least were natives, but in whichever term you use, South Central, South LA, or South Lost, which is what I'm voting for. How has this place shaped who you are and how you see the world? Erin, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, first of all. Holly, it's really good to be here. I just want to correct you. So my dad, he was a Jefferson Democrat, but he graduated from Fremont High School. And he didn't want to, because he said this in the 40s, what happened, a little bit of history, so in South Central, I call it South Central, I can't say South LA, but anyway, in South Central, it was very, very divided. Slauson Avenue was a Mason-Dixon line. It was very white, south of Slauson, right? And Manuel knows all of this. So my dad was in high school. They started in 1948, the Supreme Court outlawed the restrictive housing covenants that kept black people and other non-white people out of housing. Yes. So it started to open up slowly, and Fremont was on the south side of Slauson, and somebody had to go first. My father went to Jefferson for a semester. He begged my grandmother not to send him to that school. He knew what it was like. It was very hostile, very white, very hostile. And he said that when he showed up the first day of school at Fremont, it was like Little Rock. But this was 10 years before Little Rock, in 1947. And he didn't go to school that day. And the LA Times has stories about how people showed, they had hoods and nooses and the whole bit. And he said he ran home from school every day. And I think that's what got him started in activism, that experience of Fremont, which was, that's just one little piece of history of South Central. So I learned all this, growing up. But by the time I grew up in the 60s and 70s, I grew up not in the Central neighborhood. My father grew up on the east side, which was very, as Manuel spoke about, was a very, a very specific area where most black people were, partly because they had to live there. Right. Started to expand. I grew up near Century and Western, which is actually on the west side of South Central. But when I was growing up, it was just greater LA. There was no South Central. Right. That didn't come about until the 80s or something. Right. And then it became synonymous with something very negative. It was the hood. Yeah. But that was just, anyway, and then it became South LA, as we were saying. To me, you can call it whatever you want. To me, it's like Kentucky Fried Chicken goes to KFC. Okay, it's the same chicken, but to me, it was like a PR move on the part of the city because it is such a negative connotation that we thought we could make it hipper or cooler, but that's a whole other discussion. But for me, it's home. And I had a really sort of idyllic. We lived in a very idyllic place. This was the height of black economic prosperity in LA, and it was, even though it was very segregated, everybody was black. There were no Latinos. This was near Century and Western, near what's now Jesse Owens Park. Very stable neighborhoods, very economically diverse. There were people on the block. You could be a sanitation worker and buy a home and have a family. Right. There was times never been great for black people, but this was relatively stable. Mm-hmm. So, and it was. I got a very clear sense very early on. This was a lot better than what my parents experienced. They're from New Orleans, Louisiana, and they were looking for a freer space, more opportunity, etc. LA certainly had its problems, had its segregations, etc. But this was already better. So I grew up in I would say sort of lower middle class, but it was very prosperous compared to what I heard came before. I'm first generation LA, so. For me, it was just a really, it wasn't exactly like the homes on TV. It wasn't like the Brady Bunch. But there were similarities. There were a lot of things I identified with. It was home in a really good way. Yes. I think what's changed so much is the economics. There just aren't the jobs to support the families that were there. And that's just been very destabilizing. Mm-hmm. I live in Inglewood now, which is just across the LA border, across Van Ness. That's the dividing line. And, gentrification is kind of, it's like a zombie attack. It's coming slow, coming at you. And, I call it white return because a lot of these spaces were white and eventually whites left. And now, unfortunately, the economics are such that, only people who have the money to get these places are gonna tend to be white because it's just economic determinism, and that's really a problem. And so now the only thing I hear amongst black people is don't sell. But that only works for so long. Right. It's not a long-term strategy. Mm-hmm. So but I'm so happy to see spaces like this and just efforts to push back somehow, to stay somehow, to just maintain. Mm-hmm. I will say one last thing. In Lamert and Crenshaw, even though it's very, a lot of white folks there seems to be an interest in keeping it the cultural space that it is. Yes. I will say that's positive. It seems to be just a wider interest amongst everyone living there to keep it what it is, and I hope it's a new model.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Jorge, growing up in South Central, how did that view how you see the world?
Well, thank you for having me. So this is interesting because I was thinking about this all day. My parents arrived from Jalisco, Mexico in 1970 into South Central LA. And mom is a seamstress, daycare provider. She did seamstress.
Crystal Stairs. She was
I got a story for that. And then my dad was a gardener. And I could tell you that the reason is, growing up in South Central, my dad would cut grass all across South Central. And that's how you learn how to speak English, because a lot of the homeowners were African American. So my dad just knew enough how to charge, like, oh, this is $40 for the front. And like, oh, you want the roots out from the garden? Oh, I got that too. So he knows enough, right? And then, so my experience living with my parents, having a daycare at home, I had to sleep in the living room because the daycare was given up to Crystal Stairs, right? So they used my bedroom as the daycare, and I had to sleep in this little, I don't know what it was, some kind of tent.
Mama was a businesswoman.
Yeah,
she was working it out.
And so I've always kind of grew up in community, right? People around me, kids coming in and go, black kids, brown kids. I saw that, and I kind of, as I grew up like that, I thought that was normal. Sorry. And so my 80s and 90s experience was black and brown, right? And so as I kind of grew up as an adult, I realized how that space connected us, right? So the big house, I don't know if you guys know, it's in South Central Los Angeles, and it's like a big house. A big house. 10 bedrooms and all, but it became a safe place for all of us to gather, right? It felt natural. So my sisters and everybody was like, dude, what's up with all these people in your house? It's like, what do you mean? These are my neighbors. These are my friends that are organized. This is the union from UTLA. This is Black Lives Matter. I mean, people come and go, but it's because they know it's a safe place. Just like I see this place is that we're gathering, building community. So my experience is I always remember this Guatemalan group came to me and say, Jorge, you treat us so well. It's like, why wouldn't I? I said, because you're Mexican and the Guatemalan community, like, there's things between us. Like, really? When? I love your food. Like, I had no, like, what do you mean? And it just like, no, you're so welcoming. Like, well, why and I just didn't get caught up on the soccer teams and none of that. I'm like, dude, everyone's good. You're good. You're doing great things. Like, let's do it. Let's be about that life, right? Let's help each other. And that's how I went about. That's my South Central experience. Like, I have my sister married to a black man. I mean, my other sister was married with a black man. And it's like we have a multiracial family. The barbecue's off the chain, and we got the Mexican, So, I mean, I benefited from all that, right? I mean, why?
Let me ask you a question. Why did you get emotional a moment ago? What came up for you?
Because I know, sorry, because I know there's real struggles. And playing a role where I could relieve that. That's all that is.
My hobby. Your woman's here, so I can't say I love you in the microphone. Dr. Pastor, what respond to what you heard from the two of them? What did their comments bring up for you?
Well, the first thing I want to say, which I've actually never had a chance to say publicly, is to thank both of you. When we started I've done work in South LA for years. When we decided to start this project that led to this book, the first person we called was Jorge. And we went and visited the big house and got a sense of what was going on there. You may remember we brought a van with like 14 people and graduate students, and it was definitely a mess. And my son was driving, so it was dangerous. So, and then at the end of the process, writing the book, the last interview was with Erin. And it was partly me trying to make sense of everything. And I guess it was an interview, but it was more like a discussion of trying to make sense of the story we were trying to tell. So let me just publicly honor both these leaders for... So I'm going to speak a little bit less, but I'll tell you two things that struck me. One is something Erin was saying. I always think about Wattstax, the very famous concert that took place at the Coliseum in 72, I think it was. 71, the film came out in 72. But what most people like, they look at the music and they're so impressed. The thing to remember is there were 100,000 people who had enough money to buy a concert ticket to go to Wattstax. And that speaks to the strength of the black working class at that period of time. And the kind of families and investments that Erin was talking about. And I think we need to not romanticize that, but to try to figure out how do we create a society where working class people can live a decent life. I often tell the story. My dad came to the United States in the 30s with papers that were imperfect. And when World War II came, he got the choice of being deported or joining the U.S. Army. And he literally gave a penny to my cousin Carlitos, who flipped it. And he and the penny went to the war, came back safe. And he then, after the war, went to LA Trade Tech. And at LA Trade Tech, he was able to learn about electricity and move from being a janitor to being an air conditioner repairman. And our family was able to move from being poor, that poor where you open up the refrigerator and then close it, from being poor to being working class. And that working class job meant that we bought a home in La Puente in the San Gabriel Valley, and that they could achieve a decent lifestyle. And that is the promise we need to get back to. So all of that was evoked for me by Erin. What was evoked for me by Jorge was what Jorge, you were feeling emotional about, which is in the midst of conflict, how do you become a healer? In the midst of division, how do you see commonality? In the midst of people trying to separate us, how do you build bridges? And I want to thank you for carrying that burden.
Beautiful. So for Erin and Jorge, we heard in Manuel's historical overview that South LA has undergone a massive demographic transition. It was very powerful to see that by numbers and by years. So the question is, as I'm looking out at faces, some familiar, some not, and I'm reading facial expressions, how do black residents feel about this change? How do Latino residents feel about it? And does it vary across generations? Erin?
I knew you were going to say that. How do black people feel about it? Well, just anecdotally, Manuel talk about this a lot, but it's, it's what's the word I'm looking for? Like Manuel says, in the press, and I'm part of the press, but there's always attraction to conflict, and so the stories, it seems to me like the LA Times, the stories they would do over the years about how black and brown people feel about things. One was either really positive. They're sitting down having a meal of, tacos and chitlins or something somewhere. And that's unity. And then the other thing was they're at each other's throats on the school campuses, etc. But my father, and I have to say, he was, even though he experienced anti-black racism, as most black people did in Los Angeles, and that is the protocol of oppression, he was a coalition builder, and he believed deeply in that.
He did.
He didn't have a whole lot of company sometimes. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of black people who did not believe. I mean, it's one thing to say you want a coalition build with people living right next door to you. It seems natural, but you have to know you can't be afraid of the differences and the tensions. A lot of black people are righteously frustrated over generations of being left behind, and and not to disparage anyone, but various immigrant populations coming in and filling spaces, getting ahead. Jorge was saying South Central was sort of like a starter neighborhood for a lot of immigrants, but for me, for my family, it was like a real step up. It was a new space. It was it was definitely home. And so, but historically, there's just all of this. For a lot of black people, we suffer by comparison in terms of prosperity, in terms of progress. The press does not understand that. They don't get the nuance. They still don't. And I think that sometimes, it comes out for a lot of black folk, it's, they're getting ahead. And it's not personal. It's historical. If you can understand that. It's not personal. I live in Inglewood, which is really, to me, it's like South Central, it's just another city. But my neighbor is Latino, and it's not interpersonal. Most people, if you keep your property up and you're kind and you're compassionate, people don't care. They don't. They may not, but it's the political problem that black people have always had, and they see it over and over and over. And so it's not Latinos' responsibility to solve that. But we have to understand what's happening, what's going on, why people feel the way they feel, and give space to that. Well, it's weird. For a country that's so raw and so rude and so crazy, people are afraid to actually talk about difference. They're actually afraid of conflict in a weird way. And I think maybe, we don't have the habit of talking about what's really the problem, particularly for black people. We have a lot of grievance, a lot of justifiable grievance, but, a lot of people don't know how to receive that. Other Americans don't know how to receive it, let alone what to do with it or solve it. And so we have Jorge, though, who brings everybody together. And in a sincere way. And, people do respond to that. For all the problems and all the struggles, it's got to start with what you're doing. It does, but I would just, my dad said, one of the coalitions he tried to build was the Latino Black Roundtable. Yes. But he would always tell me, it just fizzled. Because you have to define, you have to know what you want before you can collaborate. You have to know where you're coming from, and you can't just sort of paper it over with, we live in the same space, so we're on the same page. It doesn't work like that.
Powerful.
There's a good leeway to it. What I was thinking, growing up, for me, black or brown was it was good. It was.
And we have to acknowledge it's a different generation.
Right.
I hate to put you in age out there on Front Street.
But it's okay.
Because you and I were 60s, 70s together.
Yeah.
And so it's a different generation.
Right.
I feel like we hit a sweet spot.
We did.
And then it really we didn't know it.
Right.
Until it was gone.
Right.
Jorge is like the next generation.
Yes.
Yeah, and my friends were black, brown. We were, we all were facing similar struggles. So going through high school, middle school, high school, as an adult, we stayed in touch. We hung out. But when you mention politics, that's where I realized there's something different. And I remember after doing all the work I was doing and really getting to know my community from a place as an adult, and getting involved with the big house, organizing people, doing all this good, and I'm like, you know what? We need some leadership here. So I said, you know what? I decided to run for city council. So in 2017, I said, I'm gonna bring people together. We're gonna talk. We're gonna do this, right? I feel like I understood my community, the needs, And I remember this black woman, and she's a friend of mine today, but she said, Jorge, it ain't your turn. We decide when you next. But she didn't know me then. And the thing is, she knew a little bit, but it's like, I never heard that before. I'm like, but she's part of, the black power that exists historic in South LA, and I get it. I understood what you were trying to tell me. You don't know me, you don't know where I'm come from, and you got questions, right? Later on, she's like, Jorge, you're good people, man. I don't know what I was thinking, okay, you didn't win, but give it time. Give it time. I'm like, okay. I'm keep doing the work. I'm not going anywhere. That's the thing. The reality is I'm not going. I'm keep doing the work. And I got to be consistent. My own people, my own brown community was like, who's this guy at the big house? He must be one of those narco dudes, like, I don't know. Police be coming in and out his place all the time. And I'm like, no, I was helping them with the National Night Out, and they had wanted some ideas, a photo shoot, I'm just, and then, they were like, oh no, we did his work. His mom lived down the street. We know who he is. And then it was just, okay, my own community didn't trust me. Because I'm just like, you're doing too much over here. What big house? What's going on over here? Why would anyone invest unless you got drug money? That was their thing. I'm like, this is my community. You're like, big ass house. I gotta put in work. And that's what it was. And then they're okay, they started trusting me. And all I remember is saying, just stay consistent. And it's gonna happen. We're gonna keep doing the good work. And we're here today. And it's like, I'm going to do my part, but the political part, I get it, Are we, there's, the black community, black establishment, they're nervous. But I want you to know that we're here, we're going to do this together, we're going to make it work, And we're going to revitalize, and then trust me, South LA is sexy, and people want it now. I'm like, hold on, we make it what it is. But we gotta learn we gotta figure out how to keep it. Make it our own. And work with each other, and I appreciate the space you're providing, because we have to have these hard conversations. That's it. I can't, there's no, and I hear it all the time, Jorge, when I have this conversation, let's have them. Let's get through it. Let's build together. And I think we're there. And I'm looking forward to whatever is ahead of us, but we got to just take care of our community, be in community, and just share the resources, and we're gonna be good.
That's gonna be my next nameplate. South Lost is sexy. When y'all see me with my new nameplate, you'll know. And I'm even gonna give you credit, because I give you. So before we move on, you talked about the political. Jorge and I ran against each other for this seat in 2020. Somebody said, I remember. Yes. And because of and there was a whole bunch of debates in that race. We were debating morning, noon, and night. And most of the organizations that would host debates, they would seat us in alpha order. So Mitchell, Nuño, we tended to be side by side and began to have these conversations. And then as they progressed, whoever would go first, I would say, well, I agree with what Jorge just said, and vice versa. I learned so much from you. I continue to learn from you. But one thing that was powerful, you said to me, I've learned more in political organizing and just all things politic from black electeds in South Los Angeles, because my Latino elected brothers and sisters on the east side don't see us. And so that struck me as powerful, and I had the aha moment. It was like, that is true. And so what that helped me understand, fast forward, I am in Sacramento and I'm watching the funeral procession for Nipsey. And I'm like, I see more Latino young people than black. So those two experiences for me grounded the fact that geography trumped for a particular generation
ethnicity. That there's an association with, I'm from South Los, and therefore I'm affiliated with my black brothers and sisters who live here, more so than being Latino. You want to talk about that a little bit?
No, it's
No?
no.
I said it?
Yes, I'm glad you said it. It is. That's what it is.
That was powerful for me. That was an aha moment for me, I think.
Can I make a comment?
Please.
So, so much just got said. So, first thing is to understand something that you were raising about talking about conflicts and tensions honestly. So, how many of you go to the gym? Okay, the gym. How many of you go to the gym? I saw those hands like this, right? Like you just go once in a while, right? So here's the thing. If you go to the gym just once in a while, you're going to make some mistakes. You're going to drop some weights on your feet. You're going to hurt yourself. And no one's going to help you. Because they're thinking you're there in January, but you're not going to be there in July. If you don't talk about race and racism every day, if you don't talk about the contours of anti-black racism and the protocols of oppression, you're going to make mistakes. No one's going to help you. You're not going to be able to find your way to each other. So we can't avoid these conversations. Second thing, these generations really are different. I mean, the generation of Latinos who came, the immigrant generation, they tended to shut in and shut out. They arrived in the United States with their own anti-black racism and colorism. Arriving in the United States is not destined to beat the anti-black racism out of you. It's just there to reinforce. And they arrived in a very difficult period. Lots of gang violence, etc. And so that generation shut in and shut out. This second generation that grew up in South LA, Jorge, you are unique. But you're not that unique. That is, there's a lot of people of your generation who feel the same way. That is that instead of just racial identity, there's spatial identity too. There's pride in being from South LA. And Latinos in South LA do feel very distinct from Latinos in East Los.
Yes.
They're like, why do you listen to Morrissey exactly? You know, why don't you like hip hop, right? Why don't you think constantly about your relationships politically with black folks, which you have to if you grew up in South LA? So it's a very, very distinct formation. And by the way, there's a very good book that discusses all of these issues. My understanding is the supervisor is buying a copy for every person in the district. That's a good idea, Holly.
You know, in my senior year, I attended Garfield High School, which is in East LA, and I remember some girls were talking like, "Oh, he wears funny shoes." I'm like, "What?" It's like, yeah, because I was wearing Timberlands, and they were wearing Doc Martens. So I'm like Timberlands is South Central. Your shoes are funny, you know, like. But again, I was bringing my little swag into the East Side, and they just thought I was just dressed funny. My shoes are funny. I had Timberlands.
Hilarious. So I want to transition to kind of the next generation, the new emerging, the re-emerging South Los Angeles. How are we building community wealth and power today? I think where we are, the Connect is a perfect example of that. The Big House is an example. How are we doing that today?
I'll speak on my part. It's again being intentional of building community, including people, different voices, and people feel invited, and that's what I feel like. What happens at the Big House, where I get texts, "Hey Jorge, I have this, wellness group that we're, running around in South LA. Can we use the Big House to meet once a month?" Like, yeah, sure. Street vendor campaign, Jorge, can we meet this Tuesday at 5 o'clock to talk about the street vending? Come through. It's open. And I think is what I realized on my part, people give me credit for simply opening their doors. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that people don't do that. I thought, like, damn, don't everyone open the doors? I would think if I had a big place, you open up your doors, especially when you need to be resourceful. That's the way I see it. I'm just being resourceful. I'm being a vehicle in any kind of way to help people realize their ideas. To me, young man like Marcos over there is 21 years old, but he has big ideas. He comes to the big house. Hey, can I meet my friends and we're brainstorming doing big things? I'm like, do your big things. Yeah, the big house, you know? People just need spaces.
What do you think, Erin?
I was just sitting and thinking that, you know, when I think about, I worry about a lot of things. Many things keep me up at night, but schools are really important. Public schools. And I think that, you know, the LAUSD is striking, support strike for the classified union workers. I have a brother-in-law who's on strike now, and, you know, you can't have good neighborhoods without good schools. And I went to my neighborhood schools. One of the things you probably did too.
I did, 42nd Street.
And that was a particular promise of a particular, I think, of progress. That the school you went to was going to be good, and that, you know, that was just going to be a thing. And so when I was so I went to my neighborhood school. I went to Manhattan Place Elementary School, and then I went to 93rd Street School. And then when I was in 5th grade, I was suddenly bused to a mostly white school in Westchester. This was not busing. This was 72. This was because the gifted program I was in my local school suddenly got yanked, and I had to go to a white school. That had its problems, but I think that we can't, you know, in the intervening years. By the way, I don't want to go to that school. I like my neighborhood school. Like, why am I in Westchester with these hostile white kids who rightfully ask, why are you here? I don't know. I don't know. And I didn't have the experience my father had when he went to Fremont, that all-white school. There were not people with torches on the lawn, but there were some versions of that, you know. But anyway, I think that we can, you know, we're at an inflection point as we are with so many things, but we've got to hold the line with public schools. They've been so demonized and so, you know, just sort of character. I talk about the narrative has been they're just dumping grounds for black and brown kids. And that is just, you know, angers me. And I think that to me is the wealth of a community. And we can't continue to live in our communities and send kids away. Like a business, you know, public education is not a consumer. It's not a business. Mm-hmm. It's part of the democratic ideal. Anyway, education was a particular.
And so it's interesting you should say that as an Inglewood resident. Yeah. Inglewood, public schools, in receivership.
Yes.
And continuing that struggle. And the struggle, the core of the struggle is, it's an infrastructure built for 18,000, and there are fewer than 7,000 kids going.
Yeah. Right.
So the question is why? Why have public charters and others created opportunities? It's not all demographic. Maybe some of it when we look at the aging home ownership base. Maybe that's some of it. But that's an important conversation about why. And how some communities of color, once we've arrived and we move on the west side or the north side of whatever the Mason-Dixon line is for your community, you decide what's not good enough anymore. And we lose sight of it takes our investment to make it be what we need for it to be. So those are difficult conversations I think we have to have as well. I'm glad you raised that, particularly as an Inglewood resident, because that is a real struggle that my team and I find ourselves in the middle of when we have Inglewood residents who went out of receivership. And quite frankly, when I start to peel those onion layers back, I'm not sure that they understand how they got in receivership and what it's going to take to come out. Yes, they're going to keep closing schools, because
of capacity. It's fewer than 7,000 kids occupying a space for 18,000. Those are hard public policy questions and decisions. Really, really hard.
Yeah.
Dr. Pastor, what say you?
Well, I'm going to respond to the question you asked about the next generation and a little bit of hope by telling a story, which I think is emblematic, which is some of you may remember that LA got a promise zone designation from the Obama administration, but for Mid-City. And folks in South LA were like, well, why not us? And they were told by the Obama administration there's only going to be one in Los Angeles. Don't even try to apply. So folks in South LA said, don't think so. I think actually they said, fuck you. And they put forward an application for what turned out to be Slate Z. Regardless of what you think about it, what's interesting, and I like Slate Z, is the way it got generated was around the transit line. So it picked up the Latino Central Avenue corridor, swooped over, and then dropped down Crenshaw. So it picks up the blacker area of South LA, multiracial thinking. So they applied to HUD, and they got HUD to accept another application from Los Angeles, but HUD rejected the application. And what HUD said, it put it at the bottom of the ranking. It said, there's not enough poverty in South LA, and there's not enough housing crisis. And people in South LA said exactly that. And it turned out that what HUD was thinking was that a housing crisis is when you've got a lot of vacant buildings. There's not a lot of vacant housing in South LA, there's overcrowding. And they also said, well, your economic problems aren't unemployment, there is unemployment. The real problem, though, in South LA is people who have jobs, but they're crappy jobs. So people, Slate C, flew out. Javier Becerra, the head of, I'm sorry,
Castro.
Yeah, she's from
Castro, right?
Castro, yeah. The secretary of HUD flew him out to South LA and schooled him. Took him on a tour, showed him the overcrowding, showed him the level of not just joblessness but low wages, and we contributed. We wrote a paper on this, and it persuaded HUD to change their criteria. Next year, Slate Z applied, number 2 in the country. Now, what does that speak to? That speaks to pride, confidence, and the idea that if we don't like the rules, we're going to change these rules. That's what gives me hope. That there's a big house, that there's a destination Crenshaw, that there's a Slate Z, that there's a community saying, we don't accept what you are telling us that we're going to be disinvested in. We are going to change the rules and attract the investment and make sure that it's community development and not just capitalist development.
What he failed to say, but what also gives him hope, is that Holly Mitchell is on the LA County Board of Supervisors. That gives him hope too.
That was just implicit.
Thank you. Erin, Jorge, what gives you hope before we open it up for Q&A? What gives you hope, Erin? Come on, Erin.
Jorge can go first.
Okay, Jorge, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is I think we are in a different time where people are want to do things with purpose, right? And I think it's more purpose-driven, has real impact. So if I say that we're going to open a business, we're going to hire local, we're going to, very intentional that we want to do things, keep our dollars in our community, recycle our dollars in our community. I think people are being more conscious of that. And that excites me. And I'll share this thing. So I have an advertising agency, which is my first company that I started. And then I decided to open a different branch, which is my print shop. Then I said, I want to do something more with my company. And then I made a union. So then my print shop became a union. And then now I'm on my third business, which is a cannabis company, but it's a social enterprise where I want to do profit sharing, get my investors to be people of color, because I just feel that's what I need to do. It's like I'm in this very privileged position that I was able to navigate the system. Like, okay, I'm here. I got these licenses. How can I use it? So let me include my community in this process. I have friends tell me, Jorge, how can I get involved? I see what you're doing. It's like, hold on. Let me put the infrastructure together so that you can invest. For so long we've been decriminalized on the war on drugs. And what's happening here, and this is a whole different other conversation, now that the cannabis is legal, we can't even get access to participate. Right? I'm like, hold on. And I'm like, nah, I'm thinking different. I'm prepared for this. I'm going to get my community to fund this. If you don't want to fund it, you're not going to own me. My community is going to own me, and we're going to do well. So I'm hopeful because people they're ready for that. And I'm excited. So that's it.
I'll just say that what gives me hope, even though we're experiencing a tremendous backlash to it, is what happened in 2020. There was sort of a national recognition of the role of anti-black racism in this country, period. Stop, full stop. And how it affects everybody. It's not just our lives, it's everybody. And you have to, and like Manuel was saying, you have to, recognize it before you can do anything, whatever color you are. That gives me a lot of hope. There's great resistance to this idea. People have, great resistance. But I think there is really a much stronger sense of South Central as, it's a place-based identity, and that is a good thing because nobody's going to, we feel like we're not going anywhere. Gentrification notwithstanding. So there is some unity around that, like that there wasn't when I was growing up. And I'll just say one last story. I have a cousin who, she's my father's generation, but she lived on 58th Drive, south of Slauson. And when her family moved there, white people burned a cross on their lawn and all that stuff. And then it became heavily, and then she stayed there, and then it became very heavily Latino, but she stayed there. And that neighborhood took care of my cousin. My cousin she was a linguist. She spoke fluent Spanish. But she was much loved in that neighborhood. And she lived alone, but the neighborhood just took care of her in a really beautiful way. And it's, those things are, there's a lot more of that happens, I think, than we know.
Absolutely.
And I think that is not politics, but it is sort of the foundation of politics. Just how you treat, that kind of equality. My neighbor happens to be, he's Salvadoran, and it's a multi-generational house, but he's just always there for me. I live alone with my 5 dogs. Don't tell the mayor of Inglewood because it's a code violation. Oh. I just told him myself. But anyway, but that gives me hope. Just that very elemental, simple stuff. But I don't take it for granted. And I think that there is a kind of a new sense that we're all in this together. I wrote a column many years ago in 2016 when Trump was elected. We're all in the ghetto now, all of us. He's over there and we're all over here now. So welcome to the ghetto. I use that in a figurative sense, but there is a kind of unity that comes out of that. In case you think you were special, you're not. Guess what he thinks of you? Anyway, so that is a weird, maybe, it's a weird thing to ground hope in, but that's what I have. That's what. Maybe we'll get arrested today.
We're going to transition to Q&A. And so, what gives me hope is I have never been entrepreneurial. My parents work for the government. They work for the county. You just go get a good government job and you'll be fine. So I've just never been entrepreneurial. So I am so deeply impressed. I look at Jorge and his cereal businesses, and I look at Tiffany and the Connect, and I look at David Gross,
and his commitment to Hyde Park and trying to get all of us to invest, that, you know, that they've come up with solutions. We can all sit back and whine about gentrification and point at other people. In the King Day Parade, the lady shouted me down. What are you doing about gentrification? I said, I have an answer for you. Don't sell. I mean, there is a role government can play. I'm proud of the work that we've done in Leimert Park in supporting small businesses to own. I'm proud of that work. I'm proud of the opportunity we are taking with the American Rescue Plan dollars to make sure that they are equity focused in their investment. And so our support of small and micro businesses with grants, our support of the child care industry, because thanks to COVID, we lost 1,800 child care providers in LA County alone. So I'm proud of that work. And the role government can play in a creative way to partner with those of you who are entrepreneurial to invest in our communities. So that's what gives me hope when I see these enterprising, I feel I'm old, right, Frederica? We almost 60. I'm almost 60. When I look at these younger people who appear to me to be fearless, to open the connect, to create space. So those are the things that give me hope each and every day. So I appreciate that. So do we have questions on cards, or how are we doing this? Okay, if you have questions, so let me define a question. Because my brother right here in the front, who I love with my whole heart, he never has questions. He has soliloquies. So I'm going to ask you for questions. Dr. Pastor graciously came to us. He's going to dip out in a minute because he has to go to Sacramento to tell the governor all the good things he learned about South LA today. So he's going to leave out. So if you have questions for Dr. Pastor, let's take that first before he leaves. So questions. Come on. They're coming to you with the mic. And we're going to hold the mic because y'all get your hand on the mic, we won't get it back.
Hi, I'm Jen Russell. My organization is Let's Make It Happen. And I would love to ask this question to Mr. Pastor, because I live in the USC area. I'm there for 60 years, so I've seen a lot of change. And I remember distinctly one of the things that USC did, that they had this community forum on how African Americans can make place for the immigrants. So yeah, I had to go. That's how long I've been listening to you. But my question today is, what are we doing? Because I know you've done a great deal of work in community power building. So what are we doing now to bridge that gap? Because, you know, like you said, there is a great divide, but when it looks at South LA, we have to do something collectively. Because like we are being really impacted by gentrification because there's no place to really create businesses. We just fought a thing about, you know, a hotel versus community housing. So what are we doing in that particular community that we can spread out? Thank you.
So I think that there's a lot going on, a lot to celebrate. I think a forum like this is really an important part of community building and having understandings between different parts of South LA and different political community projects in South LA. The great work of Community Coalition, building a cadre of young black and brown folks. I think the work that Cadre's been doing in schools, excellent work as well. SAGE, which is a group you're lifting up implicitly as well. I think the work of Brotherhood Crusade, although it historically comes from working in the black community, so many of those young people that they're bringing up are Latino at this point because they're really focusing in on who's growing up in the place. So I'm actually extraordinarily optimistic that that work is being done. Where I'm pessimistic is whether or not everyone else sees it and understands the need to invest in it. Both foundations and I know our ally in the county, Supervisor Mitchell, sees it, but everybody sees it. And I think one thing to realize, I mean, we're in South LA, you live in South LA, it's easy to think it's unique. And in many ways it is. I mean, who else would call themselves South Los? But what you need to understand is that the two communities that are coming into the closest proximity, residentially, in America's metro areas are Black and Latino communities. This is happening in Orlando, this is happening in Atlanta, this is happening everywhere in the United States. So the lessons from South LA about coalition building are crucial to the nation as a whole. Someone should be doing a better job of recording it. Someone should be doing a better job of investing in it to support the folks that are here.
Beautiful.
Hi. Hi. My name is Jennifer Williams. I'm a resident of unincorporated Westmont. I'm also a commissioner. What advice would the panelists have of a 30-something-year-old Black female candidate running for office in representing areas of Watts and other South Central LA communities, given the history and given the current dynamics among Black and brown folks that we've described today?
Now that was smooth. You see how she dropped that in there? What would you give a certain Black woman candidate? We see you. If one person would answer so we can move on, I see you. Whoever would like to answer.
The simple answer is hang with Holly Mitchell. She knows how to do this. And the other answer to add is just to listen to people's experiences. You know, what Jorge was describing in terms of his work of bridge building sounds to me like what you really do is listen. People feel heard. They therefore feel a part of you. And when I think about what Erin does as a journalist, which is unique, a lot of journalists come in with a story they're about to write, and they try to figure out who can give them some quotes that fit into the story. The thing I've always been impressed about when you read Erin's work is it might not have been what you were expecting, because she actually listened to what the people she interviewed were talking about. We need to do, in academics in particular, a better job of listening.
Beautiful.
Hi, my name is Maisha Ward. I work for the Lucas Museum, and so my question is going to focus on like arts and culture. Beautiful. Excited about Destination Crenshaw, and we talked about investment, but how can we use the arts and culture to bring and create this unity, investment, and empowerment?
Great question.
I'm trying to understand the question.
So the question is, how can we use the arts in a way to really help kind of bridge the gap that we've identified today? You know, for me, with redistricting, you know, LACMA is now in the 2nd District. Who would have thunk that the 2nd District would bridge the gap and go north of Wilshire? And so, you know, LACMA is not your grandmother's LA County museum. With their new construction, the construction is trying to dispel the historic whiteness of art, right? And so I know what you are building at Lucas in this current context of what museums should be in terms of welcoming spaces. We're working with LACMA. This is, I'll give you a heads up, you'll be the first to know. They're going to have an installation in a permanent space at Magic Johnson Park. Because the goal is to acknowledge the rich culture locally, because you know we create art, and to put public institutions in our communities that can display our art. So I think that those are ways in which I think the art community is getting it in a real meaningful way.
I'll add to that. It kind of triggers something. I am a graphic designer. That's my background. So on my creative side, I stumbled into something beautiful 10 years ago where I worked in the film and television industry, and I would do all this cool stuff with the film industry. And then I decided to kind of like adopt a local high school to tell their story. And oh my God, the fact that I told the story of that school, of all the amazing things to the community, let them know, like, so I took this idea of using celebrities, like the kids are the celebrities. So let's put these kids on the walls, let's put them on the street banners, let's put them on the brochures. And it was so revolutionary in education that we really are focusing on the kids and all the extraordinary things they're doing. And I think to the point is, we just want to be seen. What I've learned in that process, young people to be seen. Our communities to be seen. So when those kids saw their kids going to graduation and going to Harvard, parents were just blown away that someone really cared and put them up there. So to me, the art is about us being seen, and that's the magic that came out of that, my experience. And I'm going to tell you that from that experience, 10 years later, 90% of my business now is in education. The entertainment is like, I don't need your ticket sales. I'd rather get these kids feel powerful. And that's what I do now.
You live in a place that produced Kendrick Lamar, Kamasi Washington, Terrace Martin, Issa Rae, and Ryan Coogler went to USC. I mean, damn. It's arts and culture all over.
It is.
So it is a huge way to bring people together, to bridge difference, to celebrate. And I've got to say all that partly because my son is a musician.
And not to mention Carrie James Marshall.
Mark Bradford.
I was just about to, Mark Bradford, right there in Leimert Park. You know, according to the folks at LACMA, you know, Mark Bradford is the #1 artist in the world.
Yeah. And he started right there on Leimert Boulevard. His mother had a salon
Hair
over
salon.
there.
Exactly.
And that's how he got into, I mean, that inspired him to do the kind of art he does.
Exactly.
Actually.
And, you know, if you've seen any of Carrie James Marshall's early pieces, it's of the projects in South Los Angeles, where he grew up. Our new Congresswoman, Sidney Kamlager Dove, was on Facebook yesterday. You know, she is a product of artists. And the president did some award ceremony to artists in this past week. So Sidney was in the White House, and she's, you know, we're living life through her. She's taking pictures, and she does this little video snip that she is so emotional about the role art plays in bridging culture and building culture. And so look her up on Facebook so you can see this little video. I mean, she's literally emotional talking about her experience in seeing these various artists recognized by the White House. It was beautiful. Our last question. Yes, sir.
That's all right. I'm a LA teacher, representing 35,000 teachers marching downtown. We got 30,000 SEIU members downtown complaining. You know, our bus drivers, our cafeteria workers, our teacher assistants, teachers, cafeteria workers working together, all complain about the same thing. Underfunding of the teachers from the district, making the job difficult. So we love our students, we love our families, but the district itself is making the job very difficult.
Okay, so get to your question.
How would anyone on the panel, including the supervisor, recommend families like this who obviously love the public education, how do they get their message to the supervisor, to the superintendent?
Yeah, get it right.
Superintendent,
right.
my bad. Yep.
Yeah.
But to Carvalho,
him,
right?
Mm-hmm.
To prioritize these voices, because he does not prioritize these voices. He looks to, he looks to the other neighborhoods.
I got you. We're going to wrap. I don't know if you heard my lecture about questions, so we got it. And I don't know if you heard her. We talked about public education, how we have to stand by you. So did anybody want to respond to?
The question is how to
influence, make sure the superintendent understands the voices of the people in this room in terms of how we prioritize our children in public education. Fair summary?
I'm sure you know better than most. I mean, you know, speaking at meetings, you know, at the board of education meetings, right there. There is a good aspect to social media, isn't there? There is. Can be. Yeah, I mean, and it seems to me that I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot more activism lately. I think there was a moment that's not just LA, but other cities that this needs to be done, and that we need to get this right. right? And so I don't know. It's another discussion. I think our superintendent is trying to listen. I think that, but I think that the involvement seems to be there, and the passion is there with the teachers and other people in the district, and that's a very good thing. That's a sign of hope for me,
I think this community has always had agency. We heard the example from Dr. Pastor. When HUD said no, we said yeah. And so I think it's about community having agency and community finding their voice and identifying priorities and finding ways in which to communicate and to demand to be seen. You all don't take any hesitation in calling me and telling me what you think should be in unincorporated LA County. I feel it and hear it, which is why we're convening Racial Justice Learning Exchange. And so, elected and appointed representatives need to be held accountable, need to be seen and heard. I'm sure he saw those 35,000 red shirts. The rest of us did. I'm sure he saw you. So I think it's up to the community to express what they want for their children and their community as well. So give them a round of applause. Go ahead and put the questions up on the screen, the questions. Give yourselves a round of applause. I'm glad you came out. We spent a little time at the very beginning talking about giving you time to pose questions to each other. And so because, again, we're trying to create a safe space for people to form community, we want you to see the questions. The additional questions that were at the end. For as you're mingling and as you're exiting, find someone maybe that you don't know and ask each other the question. Who's going to come up and talk about our next Racial Justice Learning Exchange? Because now that you all are hooked, I know you want to come back. I know you want to participate in our book club as well. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for coming up. All right, Alfonso.
Gathering my notes, sorry about that. Okay, so for our next events, we have a couple events going on. I'll start off with, so my name is Alfonso Ruiz Delgado. I'm the co-lead for the book club, which is our literary arm for RJLE, where we read books on racial justice. Our next book, we're going to emphasize on the book, How to Be a Young Anti-Racist for Youth. And our main focus will be to outreach to 12 to 18 students to be participating. Where our outreach is starting in March, asking them to read it in April, and in May we're going to convene and have a conversation on how to be anti-racist. The second part for adults, there's also an adult version that we're going to launch as well. Well, we're not launching, the author is Ibram X. Kendi. He is an expert in, he founded the Center on Anti-Racism out in Boston. But the book is How to Be an Anti-Racist, and that's for the adults in the room. And that same time period, we're going to read them in April and then convene in May to have a conversation on this book. And then our next event, okay, so and that's it. That's it for our next event, and we'll hope to see you. Please sign up. Could we get to the screen with take out your phones, and there's a scan now. So if you have a scan, you could keep track of our future events and our RJLE Book Club events. Thank you.
Put the questions back up and ask people mingle and leave, post, ask each other the questions. Let's put the questions back up.
Thank you. I wasn't going to